So hello, I'm Heather Martin. I'm the subject leader for BA Fashion and MA tutor for Entrepreneurship and Creative Practices at Plymouth College of Art. I'd like to introduce you to Kate Fletcher. Kate is a fashion and sustainability pioneer, design activist, writer, nature enthusiast, and research professor at the Centre for Sustainable Fashion, the University of Arts London. She is the most cited scholar in fashion and sustainability, and her work, like that on post-growth fashion and fashion localism, both defines and challenges the field. She has written and edited 8 books translated into 7 languages. Her latest work is about design, nature, and clothing. Kate's work and writing is making futures possible. It recommends a strategic path to make sustainable design actually doable. I'm so very pleased to have you join us, Kate, and I'm looking forward to our discussion this morning. I've prepared a set of questions, and I do hope that the audience will have some questions as well. So the duration of the talk is 1 hour. Kate and I will talk for approximately 45 minutes, and then we'll have a 15-minute question period. As we talk, please feel free to type in any questions into the chat function. And during the question period, if you'd like to speak, just use the raise hand function. So when preparing for this discussion, my thinking kept circling back to the writing of EF Schumacher's 1973 release, Small is Beautiful, a study of economics as if people mattered. This book uses ideas of Buddhist economics. Most of the writing puts the human at the center of the discussion, thinking through and suggesting appropriate technologies at a human scale. Kate's work and writing traverses beyond this idea of the human at the center and considers the larger picture, the environment and its ecosystems, putting the earth first, having loyalty to the planet before industry, business, and economic growth. So there'll be 2 overarching themes for our discussion today, fashion values and post-growth economics. So Kate, welcome.
Thank you. So nice to be here.
So I'm wondering, how has EF Schumacher influenced your thinking and your research? And if so, can you give an example? And then if not, can you share a list of top thinkers or ideas that have influenced your writing and your thinking?
I'm so happy that you raised EF Schumacher. So I first read EF Schumacher when I was in college, and his work, Small is Beautiful specifically, had a huge influence on me. But actually it goes back further. So when I was in junior school, I mean, we're talking like early 1980s here, perhaps even before, maybe late 70s, something like that. I mean, a long time ago. I went and took part in an intermediate technology development group day, and I got a Small is Beautiful pencil. And it is one of my most treasured possessions. And that when I actually went on to read the book, I used to take notes with this pencil because it just felt like it was the coming together of things. So maybe that's marked my card in a way. And his ideas, which are quite wide-ranging in the book, but also they hold a real radical edge. I mean, he's approaching it perhaps in a slightly different way to me, but at the center of everything he's talking about is scale appropriateness. And that is a theme that absolutely is at the core of all of the things that I have done. And I think it's perhaps one of the key principles that maybe is overlooked within fashion and sustainability more broadly. You could look across the piece and think, okay, certainly in local communities, it's all about scale appropriateness. If we're thinking about volumes, which is one of the big issues that, you know, we must talk about this quantity of how much we're producing, again, scale appropriateness feels really important. And then if you perhaps like turn again and look at questions around nature, ecosystems, again, a species would grow up to the point at which it fulfills its niche, and then it stops growing. Then it moves into a different phase, into maintenance. And again, you begin to understand, actually, there's a scale appropriateness at work there. So, I mean, plainly, his ideas are through everything that I'm talking about and more. And of course, he had his Buddhist economics thing, which I think for many of the people that I now work alongside, that has become a practice. Buddhism and spirituality in particular that help give us the edge to understand what we're dealing with here, with these themes and questions.
And so do you feel like this sort of Buddhist practice brings you closer to nature and closer to thinking through nature for your, to come up with some solutions for design, better design, sustainable design?
Well, I have to say that I'm actually not a Buddhist, but I certainly am very sympathetic to Buddhism, and through like meditative practices, for instance. Many of those things, they begin to suggest a change in humility, I think, an ability to perhaps see things that maybe you hadn't noticed before because of an extended regard and attention and appreciation of this moment here and relationships and what that means. So I think that certainly what that does is that surfaces different sorts of questions for design. And if we're going to begin to deal with some of the biggest challenges that we face, which, you know, of course, everybody knows, you know, climate change is foremost amongst them, and biodiversity loss, for instance. If we're going to begin to do this, we perhaps need to approach what design is with a change, with less hubris. And maybe Buddhism is one of the ways that I think that we can begin to do that. And if we're not Buddhist practitioners ourselves, the things that Buddhists do as standard are the things I think that help us, a bit like a skeleton key, unlock what is going on around us.
Mm-hmm. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about Earth Logic. The reason why I'm asking this, I'm interested for you to talk a little bit about some of our current strategies for sustainable change, and then some of the limits around that, and then what led you and Matilda Tam to develop this concept of Earth Logic.
So Earth Logic, which Matilda Tam and I co-authored in 2019, is a radical action plan for change, specifically in fashion, but actually it has sort of scope far beyond that. And the idea behind it was that we were extremely frustrated that change was so slow and piecemeal in the fashion context. And we looked around and there's lots and lots of activity, maybe you'd say like lots of busyness, but very little substantive change. And for anybody who is a scholar of systems thinking, this is a classic sort of systems problem, because people are working at a sort of low level in the system, affecting product level tweaks, when actually the issue that we need to do is we need to work much higher. We need to work at the level of the purpose of the system. We need to begin to ask about what is the goal of what we're doing here, and ask these much more strategic questions. So we need to refocus things elsewhere. And so as part of this systems scrutiny, Matilda and I are very aware that the thing that pretty much across the board limits the effectiveness of the change strategies that people are typically implementing is the economic growth logic. And this time and again prevents change from actually being meaningful. And it's largely because if you're improving a product within a system that's growing, the change that you will affect will not in any way outpace the growing size of the system. And so through Earth Logic, what we did is we proposed an alternative to growth logic, and we called it Earth Logic. And it's quite simply, it puts Earth first before the priorities of industry, before business agendas. And in doing so, it's an extremely sort of simple conceptual change, but it actually goes on to change everything. It's not in any way saying that industry isn't part of what we will go on to do. It's just that the purpose of the system is set in a different way. So when we begin to do that, we begin to see entirely different priorities. It's a bit like you can imagine a stream is flowing, and in that stream there's lots and lots of different activities with lots of small tributaries attaching to it, and all of this work is going on, but only some of that work will be based in industry, and fashion or other things becomes much more broadly rendered. So we begin to see it's expressed in community priorities. We begin to see it expressed in what goes on in households, in what goes on in the commons, in lots and lots of different places. So that was where we got to with Earth Logic. It was, that's where we still are, and it's become a very, very active project. It's had, we think, more than 1 million people around the world engaging with it, and it's now in Spanish and Brazilian Portuguese. And soon it will be in Swedish, the Scandinavian language, I think, which all other Scandinavians generally can read. So yeah, that's where we're at with it at the moment.
It's fantastic. Just looking through some of the writing and strategies used within Earth Logic, just break it down in a way that just seems very approachable. It's not this big epic thing anymore. If you just think about it in small steps, it seems very tangible and doable. So I really suggest, I put it in the chat box, the link. Feel free to go there and have a look, students, if you're interested.
Heather, may I just add just another thought to that? So the way that we imagined this this new starting point is we didn't just sort of conceptually like open it up and then leave it there. We did try to bring it to a tangible space, as you just said. And so we described what we call landscapes. So these are sort of territories that you can base work in. And so we named these 6 things, and we see them as sort of advanced starting points. You don't need to go through all of the questions around, do I need to choose materials or which supply chain? You can just sort of jump forward into a landscape of less or plural or local or governance or languaging or I can't remember the other one. I
think I have it here. Learning.
Yeah. You can move within that space and then work there. And that feels like the difference. There's loads of practical examples, and the work that Matilda and I are now doing with Earth Logic is all about moving an idea to action. Because one of the big things that we say in Earth Logic, there's no point in doing this work in a sort of an academic context if it just then sits on a library shelf gathering dust. I mean, quite frankly, what's the point? So it's absolutely about bringing it to action. And most of the people that we've spoken to about it feel such a sense of relief that growth logic is called out as the problem, because actually up to this point, people have been so frustrated because they don't know how to get past it. So we've shown one way where you can get past growth logic and begin to start again with many opportunities for fashion provision and expression in an Earth Logic world.
Yeah, so like you're saying there, it sort of goes to the high level rather than just sort of approaching it at a materials level or a organic versus not organic, which these are all great things, but they're not really making that big systems change that we really need to happen in sustainable design. So yeah, excellent work. I love it. So just to talk a little bit about values and mindsets and behaviors and attitudes, what kind of values, what kind of attributes do you think that students need to have to be able to start thinking through these like larger questions?
So that's such a good question. And I think there's probably 2 ways that maybe I could talk about that. So the first way is to think about what education is for, maybe. And maybe you would say that education is preparation for the future. But what we know is that our future at the moment is very unpredictable. What we see with climate change, what we see across the board, it's ambiguous. It's uncertain, and when we're stepping towards an uncertain, changing picture, we need different skills to the very sort of measurable ones about quantifiable knowledge packets. Instead, we need different sorts of skills, I think, that are very aligned actually to design practice, to design education. And many of these things are around building a rigorous imagination, around building resilience, about helping people to deal with anticipated futures in a different way. And I think perhaps what we need to do is we need to sort of experiment in diverse ways of living. This is our task, and this is the way that we need to proceed through our education, and it's to open up that space to imagine what's possible. Up to this point, certainly in the UK, there's lots of educational establishments that are very aligned to business interests, and this, for better or, well, I would argue for worse, is really limiting the sorts of questions that people are asking. Or people are thinking, well, the only way I'm going to be able to get a job at the end of this is to just go into industry, so I might as well develop the skills that they're looking for now. But as we're going forward, I really see that industries are looking for different sorts of people with different sorts of skills, and perhaps these are some of them, these sort of things. And then the second way to perhaps think about that is that what we understand about fostering change is that the most powerful way to get people to alter their behavior without seeming that this is some sort of, influencing people without their wishing. But the best way to do that is to appeal to their values. So frequently people say, oh, if you appeal to people's wallets, if you say you're going to save money by recycling this over doing this, they think that that's the good way to influence behavior. But actually, it's been shown repeatedly that it's much more effective if you appeal to people's values, certainly in the longer term. And so that then rises to the surface a new important focus on values, and that we lead with values going forward. And again, in Earth Logic, that's what we did. We named a set of values that were leading us literally by the hand through the work, and then these values then become like work that help us make decisions about what's important. So this, I think, is the role of values in two, obviously two and many more different ways.
Great, thank you. So you're talking about diverse ways of knowing, diverse ways of thinking, diverse ways of thinking through design. I'm wondering how collaboration and cross-disciplinary practice has influenced you over the years, and how you might think this can support students' creative work and thinking.
Yeah. My preferred way of working is collaboratively. I'm not saying it's easy, because it never is, but this is the real work of collaboration. It's often part of what is like a feminist practice as well. It's staying with the trouble of all of the difficult things that rise up when you're collaborating. But time and again, and certainly I would say that Matilda and I have a very strong collaboration, and we're both really fortunate in that we really have each other's backs. We really trust each other. And what we've gone on to see is that what we create when we work together is so much better than our two sort of brains and bodies and hands separately. And this is like the power of it. And it's not like it comes without difficulty. So time and again, for instance, we've been asked to speak at various events, and they say, oh, just one of you, just come. And we're like, hang on a minute, but that wouldn't really represent our collaboration. Our collaboration requires both of us. So we're both going to come, and they're like, oh, hang on a minute, but we've only got one microphone. Okay, well, we'll share the microphone. So time and again, things are thrown. So what you see is that the world isn't set up to receive collaboration. It's set up to receive a sort of, to one person who is like the spokesperson for whatever's going on. But actually, if you're going to be thinking continuously across skills and people and disciplines and other things, we need to be thinking about, well, how can we make spaces that are shaped in different ways, and that is important. And it is so about the difficulty of it too. I mean, often I think we put time into thinking through the subject and see that that is the difficult thing, but we need to give as much time to nurturing these collaborative relationships too. And that is often the unspoken or perhaps undervalued aspects of this, but this is the work. And I think, you know, this is also what we need to be doing when we're thinking about training ourselves in this space. So this sort of work is the work that we need to do as well.
Yeah, so thinking about industry and the attributes that students might need when they go into industry, this is, you know, working collaboratively is a big one. And how do students work better collaboratively? They have to do it. They have to understand it. They have to understand how to work together to be able to come up with really big solutions for big problems. And so I don't mean to just frame it around industry, but it's kind of creative practice, working together. You're always bouncing ideas off of one another, having some sort of dialogue, and you go out into industry and you do those kinds of things too. With all of these, with the values at the center of the thinking, we could create some big change, I think, is basically what I'm saying. So my next question is, how can localism influence how we use and consume clothing? So you've written and done a lot of research around local wisdom, craft of use, and I'm interested for you to expand upon that a little bit for the audience.
Yeah, it'd be a pleasure. When I did my PhD, one of the people that I remember reading about localism described working locally as sort of the most powerful mechanism to deliver change towards sustainability. And I suppose I've taken that to heart. The argument is that when you organize things locally, power is distributed in entirely different ways. So if you have influence over decisions that affect your life, you will behave differently. And you can really only do that if you're working on a small enough scale. So that's one of the reasons why it's so powerful. And then the sort of twin reason with that is that where you live, you can see what your environment is like around you, and then you begin to understand in sort of rapid feedback loops the sorts of effects that your actions take. So then you begin to modify. So the idea here is that if you can change the way that people make decisions, and also enable people to see the effects of those decisions and to then begin to adjust what they're doing accordingly, then different and possibly better things will happen, or the idea is that better things will happen. These things aren't always beautiful. They don't always work, we should say, because they're inevitably really diverse. People come with conflicts and other ideas, but what you're saying is that people begin to feel more agency in their own lives. And we would certainly say, if you look at globalization, that's one of the things that's happened, is that benefits are taken almost immediately out of a community and then up to some sort of multinational faceless corporation, you know, offshore in some other location. But if you've got a community, it's a bit like it's like a force that takes it inwards into the community, benefiting what goes on there.